Is it normal to leak a little bit of urine while you are running or exercising? I'm here to tell you that it's definitely not normal, but it is extremely common. And most of the females I work with, as they get older or perhaps post-childbirth, really do struggle with this concern. And if this is happening, it's essentially a bit of a dysfunction between your core and your pelvic floor, and we need to be able to talk about that to rectify it. This is a topic I feel that most people don't speak about. It's embarrassing. We don't want to talk about leaking urine. In order to start fixing it and to help females with this problem, we really do need to start talking about it a little bit more. So this video is going to be focused on that. We're going to dive into some things. You may want to cringe a little bit, you may be getting a little bit embarrassed, but let's start opening this conversation so that we can really get to the bottom of it and start helping females to not be embarrassed, to not wear black tights all the time, to hide a little bit. So the medical term for leaking urine is incontinence, right? And there's two different types of incontinence. There's urge incontinence and urinary stress incontinence. Essentially, urge incontinence is when you have the urge, the feeling like you need to go to the bathroom or you need to urinate, but you have an empty bladder. And that is essentially caused from years of bad habits, one of which can be holding in your urine. And when you have a full bladder, that is actually the neural pathways then get used to that. And then later on in life, you can have an empty bladder and there's still that urge that you need to go. Urinary stress incontinence is when you have a leaking urine, all right? And that's from a stress, and very often that is from any sort of impact or pounding kind of work. And it's all got to do with the way your pelvic floor interacts with your core. And we're going to dive into a little bit of more detail about that in this video. So most people think that when you have stress incontinence, that little bit of leaking urine when you're running or jumping or doing strength work is mostly due to a weak pelvic floor. Very often it can be. But let's just dive into essentially a little bit of the anatomy of how the pelvic floor interacts with the core.
Most people think that normal pelvic function is about strength. It's not strength alone. It is about being strong and not tight, as opposed to being weak and tight. The goal with building strength and also making sure that we are not tight is to really get the pelvic floor muscles to be working in conjunction with our deeper core. In particular, our transverse abdominis muscle as well as our diaphragm. The pelvic floor works in conjunction with your diaphragm, and together that creates an intra-abdominal pressure. Now you can imagine when you're running, every step we take in a running stride is what's actually affecting that abdominal or intra-abdominal pressure, and that's what can potentially lead to that stress incontinence or leaking urine.
Okay, so we've dived a little bit into the anatomy of how the pelvic floor works with the core and the diaphragm, and why the stress incontinence could be happening. But why is this more common in females than in men? It does happen in men, but it is more common in females, and there's two reasons. Most females will talk around after childbirth and having kids, and how they struggle with a little bit of stress incontinence and leaking urine. And yes, it is caused by childbirth a little bit, and that your integrity of your pelvic floor is a little bit compromised after childbirth. Of course, there's ways that we can fix that and sort of sort that out, and we'll dive into that a little bit later. But the first reason, yes, is childbirth, and then the second reason is menopause. Is that as you're going through menopause, we've spoken a lot around this normal process of aging and muscle mass loss, and so the same thing is happening there. Is that your pelvic floor is a muscle, and so there is that loss of integrity in your muscle, or muscle mass loss there, but also change in your ligaments. Your ligaments become more lax. There's a loss of different collagen fibers, and obviously then everything doesn't hold in place as it once did. So those are the two main reasons, and that's probably why females, as they get older, really struggle with incontinence. All right, so it's not just about Kegels. It's not just about strengthening. Really, it is so important, because this isn't something that you can self-diagnose. If you are leaking urine when you exercise, when you jump, when you do anything, again, that's not normal. There's some sort of dysfunction. And I'd really urge you to seek out a pelvic floor specialist, or a physio who specializes in female health, to help diagnose this. Because as I mentioned, it's not just about a weakness. It can be a tightness. It could be a tone concern. And so seeking out a specialist, a pelvic floor specialist, will really go a long way to diagnosing what your concern is. if you do just start doing some strengthening, like I mentioned, you could just actually be making that worse and worse, and then you're never going to get better. It might require a pelvic floor specialist to loosen up that area, trigger point that area, find out where the concerns are, and really get to the bottom of as to why this is. I've heard reports and spoken to a few female health specialists who mention that 1 or 2 treatments of trigger pointing really goes a long way, and then we can start strengthening thereafter. So please, I really urge you to seek out a pelvic floor specialist if this is something that you're struggling with, because it's not just around doing Kegels at your desk at work. One of the things that you can do that will really help is a breathing technique. And so it's not just around the Kegels, it's around really trying to breathe and teach that diaphragm to work with the pelvic floor. And this is quite nice. You can do this the first thing in the morning, maybe post your yoga session or your mobility, because it will really just help get that balance between how the 2 muscles interact with each other. And we're going to go into that and show you how to do that now. Just to reiterate on strengthening the pelvic floor, if you are seeing a pelvic health specialist, they will teach you how to sort of contract your pelvic floor. It's not just a matter of squeezing, right? So everyone always says, oh, well, pretend you're holding in a wee. That's not the right way to do it. There's specific techniques as to how to strengthen your pelvic floor and get that contraction in the right sort of way. All right, we've established that it's not always just a strength concern, that it's got a lot more to do with how your deep core interacts with your pelvic floor, interacts with your diaphragm. And so it's not just a strength concern. Very often it's a tightness. And very often it's got how to, like I mentioned, around the breathing interaction. And because when we're sitting or standing most of the time, when we breathe, we tend to, and because of gravity, breathing tends to go down. Our rib cage doesn't expand the way that we want it to. And so a great breathing technique that you can do is going into child's pose. And if you just put a pillow under your knees or under your tummy, just for a little bit of comfort. And what you want to focus on here is deep breathing. Put your hands on your back, on your ribs, and focus on breathing outwards. Focus on pushing those ribs out to the ceiling, up to the top, not breathing down into the ground. That'll really help this mobility of your ribs, help focus on your breathing technique, and really expand that diaphragm. Doing this every day will teach your diaphragm and teach the muscles in your ribs how to be expanding in the right sort of way. If you're experiencing urine leakage or incontinence, just know that you're not alone. Okay, it is not normal that we're going through this. It is extremely common, so you are not alone. But we have to start speaking about it so that we can start fixing it, and so that more females don't feel so embarrassed to actually even mention this or constantly wear black tights in the hope that that hides that little bit of leaking urine. Let's start this conversation. Let's open it up. And so if you are struggling with this, please can I urge you to seek out the help of a pelvic floor specialist who focuses on female health, because it will really go a long way to diagnosing and treating this issue for you, and so you can enjoy your sports and your running without having to worry about this. If you got any value out of this video, please subscribe to the channel and check out some of our other videos.